Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to No Timeouts, a football show coming at you from the Score Studio. My name is Jonah Birenbaum. That is Dan Wilkins. That is Tyler MacKillop. That is Justin Boone. You know them. You love them. Booney, it's great to have you back from your Week 18 bye. And gentlemen, stick a fork in the 2024 regular season. It is done. The playoffs are upon us. Wildcard weekend is nigh. We're fired up. Obviously, we're going to spend a lot of time today teeing up the postseason. But before we do that, we'd be remiss if we didn't take a moment here to reflect on the season that was, and specifically to recognize the individuals who stood out the most in 2024. So before we get to our playoff preview, we've got to hand out some hardware. Gents, I want to know who you'd be voting for the league's major individual awards, not who you think will win, but who you feel is the most deserving, the guys you'd have on your ballots. And let's start with the most prestigious individual award, MVP. By season's end, this was essentially a two-horse race between two superstar quarterbacks in the AFC. Wilkie, who's your pick for MVP?
Lamar Jackson.
T.
I'm the same. I'm with Lamar as well.
Lamar as well. Boone.
I'm going with Josh Allen. It's not just the Bills thing either. We talked about this on the show, like 3-4 weeks ago. You brought up Lamar as like a guy that should be more considered. He's definitely right in the mix there. I just think it goes back to the exact same thing. It's Josh Allen had a worse supporting cast. Lamar had Derrick Henry, who almost had 2,000 yards himself, right? They could have built that offense around Henry if Lamar missed time. If Josh Allen misses time, and I'm not saying the Ravens would have any sort of success like they had if Lamar wasn't there. Both these teams would be decimated if they didn't have it. But if Josh Allen is gone, the Bills are picking in the top 10 in my mind. His team ended up with more wins. Would have been 2 more wins if they actually tried against the Patriots in Week 18. I don't see how you don't give it to Allen, and that's what the odds are showing right now, too.
Well, it's fascinating because Allen is the heavy betting favorite, and yet 2/3 of our panel went with Lamar Jackson. Wilkie, why Lamar?
So this MVP debate has gone on for a long time, and it's gotten pretty toxic online. I think that both are very deserving. Of course, Josh Allen has a very strong MVP case, but here's where I'm at with the award right now. Lamar Jackson has had one of the best quarterback seasons we have ever seen. He's the EPA per dropback leader by a long shot over Josh Allen and every other quarterback in the league. But historically speaking, he's the first quarterback ever to throw for over 4,000 yards and run for over 800 yards. I believe he finished with over 900 yards on the season. But he's also the first quarterback ever to throw for more than 40 touchdowns with less than 5 interceptions. It's one of the best seasons we've ever seen. And for me, when I look back on this MVP race in 5 years, I want to award the guy who had one of the best quarterback seasons I've ever seen, rather than saying this guy had a slightly worse supporting cast, so we're going to prop him up instead. So to me, just the historic aspect of the season, just how good Lamar's been. I don't love diving into the, definitions of value and trying to say, okay, this guy had a better number one receiver, this guy had a worse receiver, so we're going to prop up the other guy. That doesn't do it for me. I just want to pick the best player, and to me, that's been Lamar.
I really do think that this could be an instructive case, potentially even a landmark case, in settling the debate between the statistical argument and the more narrative-based argument. Not to say Josh Allen didn't have a tremendous statistical season, but the whole he did more with less argument, I think that's the meat of his case, whereas Lamar on paper I think had the stronger statistical season. We'll see how the voters decide. Let's move on to Offensive Player of the Year. Wilkie, who you got?
I got Joe Burrow.
Joe Burrow.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. T?
Yeah, I can't get with that. I'm with Saquon. I mean, 2,000 plus yards, turning back the clock for the run game in the sport.
Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, I mean, Saquon would have set the rushing record if he had actually played in Week 18, right? It's got to be Saquon. This is the stats-based award. It's got to go to Saquon.
Yeah, so I know that you were paying attention. He's just one of 8 running backs ever to eclipse 2,000 yards. In terms of yards from scrimmage, I believe he had the 13th most productive season in the history of the NFL. How are you voting for Joe Burrow?
Yeah, I mean, I don't deny. I'm the most pro running back guy on the show, so it does seem a little bit weird. But I mean, when we look at the MVP award, I guess we all disqualify any quarterback whose team wasn't in the mix, right? So Joe Burrow's automatically out. But I think we all know if the Bengals were in the playoffs, he would have been right in the mix with Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. To me, this is the way to recognize what was also an incredible season. He was putting a really bad team on his back all year long. One of the best quarterback seasons we've seen in quite some time. Not quite on the level of Lamar Jackson in my mind, but honestly right there with Josh Allen. So to me, this is my way of kind of recognizing that. Of course, Saquon had an amazing season, but I feel like we have to have some way to recognize how good Joe Burrow was this year, and to me, Offensive Player of the Year makes sense.
There will be. There's another award coming up that we'll list to him.
The Joe Burrow love has gotten out of control. Like this is an award that doesn't really go to quarterbacks, and I think rightfully so, because other positional players don't get the type of consideration for MVP. So I'm always in the business of giving this to a player that isn't a quarterback.
Fair enough, but almost 5,000 passing yards, more than 40 touchdowns. It is, I think, a closer race than people think. But
You know who else did that? Justin Herbert. He went 9-80, threw for over 5,000 yards.
why didn't you vote for him?
No, he did that a couple of years ago. He didn't get
Why
the
didn't you
love
vote for
Joe
him
Burrow
then?
is. Well, I didn't have a vote. I still don't have a vote.
Well, we'll see if we can do something about that. Gentlemen, let's move on to Defensive Player of the Year. Wilkie, who you got?
I got Patrick Surtain.
T?
It's bad to give this to a player on a defense as bad as the Bengals, but Trey Hendrickson had an incredible season for a defense that was so terrible. It's just supremely impressive. Led the league in sacks.
I don't think it is that bad. I mean, I think we let the MVP discussion bleed out into other awards.
Yeah.
I don't care about the value
true.
thing. Who was the best?
Booney, who you got?
I'm going with TJ Watt. He was the favorite before the final month, and then he got hurt, and then he played through the injury and kind of had a bad end to the season, just like the Steelers had a bad end to the season. Didn't have a sack in the last 3 games. But I wonder, when it's very close like this, will voters maybe look at that name and see TJ Watt and go, oh, yeah, he's been good for a while, and he's the kind of player that deserves it, and end up voting for him? I just wonder how much they're going to dock him for that final month, because I think he had a great season before that.
I think the way to the case for Patrick Surtain, the way that I want to be looking at this is it's a way to recognize how good the Broncos defense was without really any other way to do that. He's the best corner in the league, I think easily so, and he covers number 1 receivers more than anyone else, and he's been the key to that defense being as good as it has been all year and the key to the Broncos being in the playoffs. So I think that narrative probably will win out in the end, and he's a really deserving candidate.
Yeah, I mean, top 5 in the NFL in coverage snaps per reception, top 5 in passer rating against. I think he led the league in interception yards. Certainly a tremendous season. I am very intrigued by the Hendrickson pick, though, and I do wonder the extent to which he'll be penalized for being part of a defense that wasn't very good. But 17 and a half sacks for a second season in a row, that is absurd. Let's move on, though, to Offensive Rookie of the Year. Wilkie, who you got?
Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers.
Wilkie's taking a Brock Bowers. Shocker.
I'm with him. I think that's the last month of the season should really take things over the top for Brock, but
I love the Brock Bowers call. I want to say Brock Bowers too, but there's just no way it's going to go to him. It's going to go to Jaden Daniels. And
Yeah, but what's your vote?
Well, that's my vote. There's 3 guys. It depends. And like we said, we could debate the criteria for all these awards. And there's one coming up where we're really going to have to talk about the criteria for it. But you look at what Bowers did. Fantastic. Incredible season. But we saw something very similar last year when Puka had this incredible year. And what happened? It went to a quarterback. It went to C.J. Stroud, who showed up in Houston and breathed life into that franchise, and they overperformed all expectations, and they made it to the playoffs. And guess what? This year, Jaden Daniels shows up in Washington, breathes life into that franchise. They're in the playoffs as a contender. It's going to go to him. But I think Bowers and also Malik Neighbors, they deserve to really get something for their seasons because they both had incredible years.
Yeah, I think that for me, the Bowers argument is similar to my argument for Lamar. When I look back on this award, I want to incorporate the historic aspect, right? He's had the best rookie tight end season ever. I mean, arguably the best or one of the best rookie pass catcher seasons ever. He has the most rookie receptions of any player of all time. Broke a record from Mike Ditka for rookie receiving yards by a tight end that has stood for 60 years. To me, a guy like that coming into the league, immediately being the number 1 pass-catching tight end across the league in a league that has a ton of good pass-catching tight ends, that is more impressive to me than, as good as Jaden Daniels has been coming in and being a top 10 to 15 quarterback. I mean, I think it should go to Bowers, but I'm not disagreeing. I think it probably will go to Daniels in the end.
Also, let me throw a little fantasy tidbit in here. Get ready for the offseason talk of whether Brock Bowers should be a first-round pick in fantasy drafts next year, because a guy who's putting up, we've seen it with Travis Kelce and stuff. When a guy puts up top 10 wide receiver numbers from the tight end position, he deserves to be in that conversation.
The Shador to Bowers stack is going to be absolutely...
Don't make Wilkins cry. Come on.
It's going to be outrageous. Defensive Rookie of the Year. Who we got?
Jared Verse.
Jared Verse, the reason this defense is
that
changed.
one's unanimous.
Unanimous. That's our first one. That was completely unanimous. Do we even need to dive into this one? T, give me a 20-second breakdown for why he's going to win it.
Well, I could just I can do it very simply. I can say Tyler had him to win defensive player of the or defensive rookie of the year before the season even started. Credit to me.
Does that mean the Jags are also in the playoffs?
I didn't hear you say Trevor Lawrence for MVP.
Yeah.
Okay, comeback player of the year. Who we got, Wilkins?
Joe Burrow.
Again, Boone said it. We got to get into the definition of this award. Like J.K. Dobbins, I know he had a span of time where he was out.
No.
But, I mean, the ability to come back from like multiple ACL tears and Achilles tear. And when he was out, this Chargers team could not run the ball at all to any degree. And he comes back and they find some form of efficiency. He's had a really good year for a guy that's battled significant adversity his entire career.
Okay, it's Joe Burrow, but we got to give Tyler props because you did say this before the season that Dobbins had the chance to win this award, and we kind of like went, no, there's no way. And this is one of those scenarios where I think everybody's right to some extent, right? Like you nailed
Tyler
it.
is not right.
No, he nailed it.
Well, it's my vote. It's my vote.
He nailed it before the season in terms of Dobbins could come back and have this kind of success, but at the same time, he still got hurt again, and that was the concern, that would he be able to do what he hasn't been able to do his entire NFL career, and that was stay healthy for long enough. And again, he couldn't. That sucks, but let's hope he can have a good offseason. Let's hope he can come back strong and kind of continue to get his career back on track like he did at a point this year. But it's got to go to Burrow, and this is the one that I was saying we got to talk about the criteria because they sort of put out new guidelines, and it's not like you have to abide by it. It's just sort of guidelines that said before this voting session that you have to either be coming back from an illness, injury, or some type of physical limitation. And I think that makes Joe Burrow the obvious candidate. If voters don't abide by that, which they might not, a lot of times people don't do the required reading, right? If they don't abide by that, then there's a chance that Sam Darnold could get this award because Darnold had a great year. He overcame incompetence, I guess. But his team was significantly better, made the playoffs, had this great season. So there could be some voters that kind of overlook the new guidelines and vote for him, but I think it's going to be Burrow.
I hate that I've become like an anti-Joe Burrow guy over the last 2 weeks of the show because I have always loved him. But like a little wrist injury, we're talking about like significant adversity to overcome that injury. Like
he was very clearly not healthy all of last season, and he missed. I think it was 7
I know,
games.
but like we're not if I'm talking about injury, I'm talking about things that like threaten your future of playing the sport. Not, I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit
quarterback and it's a wrist injury.
I mean, at the beginning of the season, we were having people dig up clips of him on the sideline picking up a water bottle and being like, "Oh my God, he couldn't pick it up properly," and then he goes on to have the season that he did.
I'm not even disputing that J.K. Dobbins came back from a more serious injury. It's just that he wasn't close to as impressive as Joe Burrow was this season. From week 3 onwards, J.K. Dobbins averaged 3.8 yards per carry. He didn't have a single 100-yard game. You take out his first 2 games of the season, this conversation is completely different. And I get that that's not how awards work, but like Joe Burrow was just, to your point earlier, he was the 3rd best quarterback in the NFL this season, and I don't think that it's close.
It's a weird award.
It's a weird
award.
Joe Flacco won it last year. What was he coming back from? Being benched?
They need to have like a most improved player award as well, and then you could give that to Sam Darnold. You could give this to Joe Burrow.
Or breakout player. I hate when they confuse comeback with breakout. To your point earlier, it's very frustrating. Anyways, let's move on to our final award, Coach of the Year. Wilkie, who you got?
I didn't think I would land on this one in the end, but I got Dan Campbell.
Really? Wow. Okay, T, who you got?
I'm sticking with Kevin O'Connell. Insanely impressive year, offensively, defensively, just bringing this entire team together that a lot of people wrote off heading into the season.
Boone?
It's Kevin O'Connell for me. There's a reason, like there were reports recently that teams were looking to potentially trade for him. I don't think that's going to happen, but that at least tells you how other teams around the league view this guy. And like that system does a great job coaching. That system on offense, basically every quarterback that's gotten under center there, whether it was a backup for a couple weeks, whether it was a guy for a season, they end up having success. And as I've talked about on the show before, I think that's a huge reason why Sam Darnold had the season that he did.
Well, I'm fascinated by your choice because Minnesota came into the year with modest expectations, won 14 games. The Lions were projected to be the Super Bowl contender that they are. Why Campbell?
Yeah, and that's the reason. I mean, that's the background on this award every year, right? Rather than giving it to the best coach, we just give it to the team that like surprised us the most, right? And for a long time, I was with you guys. I was on Kevin O'Connell. I mean, even leading up to last week. But for me, the Sunday night game was kind of the decider because, I know the Lions had big expectations coming into the season, but they have been decimated by injuries all season long. And I was ready to write them off. I said on the show last week, I said the Vikings were going to win that game because the Lions had been torn apart on defense. They had been terrible over the 5 weeks prior, and they come in and they beat the brakes off the Vikings. So to me, their ability to just withstand everything that's thrown their way, obviously they had high expectations heading into the season, but my expectations have progressively gone down for them as the season has gone on, and they've just exceeded those as week after week. So to me, I just think that their ability to overcome all of these obstacles that have come up and just have that next man up mentality kind of speaks to the coaching staff and the culture that Dan Campbell's built.
I love Dan Campbell. I think the knock on him is, at least I think it should be, is people are going to look at it and they're going to say the two coordinators that he has 2 head coaches for offensive and defensive coordinator, and those guys are now going to leave. I want to see what he does next year. I think he can still keep it going. I think they can bring in guys that are going to continue that. And I love like that real leader of men style head coach. We've talked about that on the show before. So deserving, I don't think that the voters are going to end up.
I agree, but Kevin O'Connell also has the best defensive coordinator in the entire league. So
a very good one as well.
Yeah. I think it's what you said in my mind is just having O'Connell having a little bit more control of play calling, at least on offense.
Which is a factor that ought to be considered, I think, when voting for Coach of the Year. All right, good stuff, boys. Now it's time to look forward, though, because it's playoff time. Wild Card weekend is imminent. Super Bowl 59 will be here before we know it. Now, pop quiz. Do any of you guys know how many Wild Card teams have actually gone on to win the Super Bowl? Throw it a number.
Wrong.
4.
8.
2.
All of you are wrong. Well done. The answer is 7, the most recent being the 2020 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now,
He's just always trying to plug the Bucs.
They make it easy, man. They make it easy. So it goes without saying that the odds are stacked against wildcard teams. But having said that, anything is possible in the playoffs. The Giants beat the Patriots. People forget. So in that spirit, I want you guys to give me one reason why each wildcard team, each of the 6 wildcard teams, can win the Super Bowl. Wilkie, let's start with you, and let's start with the winningest wildcard team in 2024, the Minnesota Vikings. Why can they win the Super Bowl?
We just talked about it. It's coaching. This team obviously has talent on both sides of the ball, but Kevin O'Connell is probably the best or one of the best offensive play callers in the league. Like I just said, Brian Flores, I think, is the best defensive coordinator in the league. These guys just put the players in position to have success, and as a result, they have a chance to beat any team they come up against. So, it didn't work out against the Lions in Week 18, but with this coaching staff, I wouldn't be surprised if it looks a lot different when they come up against them again in the playoffs.
T, let's move on to the highest seeded wildcard team in the AFC, the Los Angeles Chargers. Why can the Chargers win the Super Bowl?
Very simple in my mind. This is a team that had the second worst point differential against teams that are in the postseason. If this red zone defense and defense in general shows up and plays to the standard they played all season, they're the best red zone defense in the NFL, 45% touchdown rate against. If that shows up and they're able to keep teams from putting up 6s as opposed to 3, that's going to go a long way in putting together a Super Bowl run.
They say defense wins championships. Boone, what about the Packers? They've got a tough path to the Super Bowl, obviously, going through Philadelphia, and they're a bit banged up right now. Why can the Packers win the Super Bowl?
I think they're being slept on a little bit just in terms of how they compare to some of the other top teams in the NFC. Like, if you look at their losses, like they were 11-6, they were way behind the top teams in terms of their wins. But let's look at who they lost to. The Bears, Week 18, Jordan Love only played a portion of that game. I'm not really going to hold that one against them. Their other 5 losses, they lost twice to the Vikings, and both games they lost by 2 points. They lost twice to the Lions, and one game was by 3 points, one game was by 10, and it was like 24-14, I believe. So kind of close. It wasn't like this crazy blowout. And then go back to the opener when they lose that game in Brazil to the Eagles, kind of a weird one on the road. And even that was just a 5-point loss. So I think they're actually a lot closer to those top teams in the NFC than people maybe give them credit for. This will come down to the quarterbacks and the health of the quarterbacks. And it seems like Jalen Hurts is going to play and get cleared from concussion protocol. We don't know that yet when we're recording. Jordan Love, we'll see. They haven't really shown much of him at practice yet. Hopefully he's okay. But if he's healthy, I think they do have a shot to take out the Eagles this week. And if they do that, then the sky's the limit.
And Jordan Love got hurt in their season opener against Philly.
At the very, very end.
Yeah.
But yeah.
All right, sticking in the NFC, the Washington Commanders. They're back in the playoffs for the first time since 2020, thanks in large part to presumptive Offensive Rookie of the Year, Jaden Daniels. T, why can the Commanders win the Super Bowl?
They have one of the most underrated rushing attacks in the entire league. We talk about Jaden Daniels a lot, but Brian Robinson's coming off a pretty damn good year. Austin Eckler's healthy. Their run game is I believe it's 3rd in EPA per play. They're averaging over 5 yards a carry. And we've started to see it later in the season. Jaden Daniels running the ball a ton, and you're going to see that more often because when Daniels gets into some of these desperate postseason situations, he's more than happy to use his legs to make plays. If they can run the ball as effectively as they have all season, they're going to give themselves a chance to compete with anybody they play in the NFC.
Daniels amazingly had more EPA on design runs and scrambles than any other quarterback in the NFL, more than Lamar Jackson, who set the rushing yards record by a quarterback this year, which is absolutely incredible. I think people sleep on that element of Washington's attack, but yeah, I'm with you. All right, stop me if you've heard this one before, but the Pittsburgh Steelers, they're back in the playoffs with a scrappy wild card team that's anchored by their defense. Boone, why can the Steelers win the Super Bowl?
Because they're scrappy, right? Because they play these kind of like, they force teams into these like brawls, these low scoring like defensive games, and they're going against the Ravens. This is the toughest one to make a case for, I think, because they're huge underdogs this week, but they split the season series with the Ravens. The game that they won, they had George Pickens. The game that they lost, they didn't have George Pickens. And this week, they're going to have him back, so that gives them a chance here. But again, this is a team that has a good defense, that was second in turnover differential this year at, I believe it was plus 16. So if they can kind of get that going in their favor, if they can play another one of these kind of games in the mud against the Ravens, maybe we see them do it. Maybe we see them kind of continue that, but that's a tough case to make.
Yeah, we're really stretching here now.
Well, I don't know that the Steelers are the hardest one to make a case for.
You left that
gotta
for
talk
me.
about the Denver Broncos, who are against all odds back in the playoffs for the first time since they were Super Bowl champions in 2015. Wilkie, why can this Broncos team win the Super Bowl?
The reason the Broncos can win the Super Bowl is because miracles can happen. I mean, that's all I've got for you. It's like, I don't want to be too dismissive here. They do. There are some good elements to this team.
You said it.
I said it before. Patrick
Surtain.
Surtain's awesome. The defense is good, but come on, man. Let's be realistic. Like, they're going to need a miracle, maybe 3 miracles to get through the Bills, the Chiefs, the Ravens, and the AFC. I think their Super Bowl was making the playoffs, so good for them, but yeah.
The Mile High Miracle. It could happen. 2025, it could happen. Great stuff, gentlemen. Now I want to look at the division winners, but I want to do the inverse exercise of what we just did. Wildcard teams, they have no expectations, so it's easy to take a glass half full perspective. That is not the case necessarily with the 8 division winners. They've got expectations, at least a lot of them do, and that makes their flaws, if not necessarily more concerning, at least more amplified. So I want to know what concerns you about these 8 division winners, and I ultimately want to know why these teams won't win Super Bowl 59. And we might as well kick off with the favorite of all favorites, the league's 2-time reigning champions, the team going for an unprecedented three-peat and their 4th championship in a 6-year span. Wilkie, why won't the 15-2 Chiefs win the Super Bowl?
I think it's because of the pass defense. Last year, they kind of overcame a pretty disappointing season from the offense, in large part because the defense was very good. In 2023, they were 4th in pass EPA on defense. This year, I believe they are 14th. It's just been a pretty sizable drop-off when you consider that they're going to have to go through a lot of elite quarterbacks to get back to the Super Bowl again this year. So I kind of think that that's going to be their downfall, and I'm not just making the case there. I honestly do think it. So if you got space for a bold prediction here, I'll tell you that I think the Chiefs will not win a game in the playoffs this year.
Won't win a game?
No.
So you might be setting my Chargers to the...
Yeah, the Chargers are going to
AFC
beat them in the
championship.
divisional round, yeah. We're going to get a Harbaugh versus Harbaugh Bowl in the AFC title game.
I could see the Chiefs being upset, but not by the Chargers, man.
Listen, it's very, very hard to beat the same team 3 times in 1 year. So
I think that has proven that it's not.
well, it's going to be this year.
I don't want to waste too much time talking about how the Chiefs are, good, because I think most people know that they're good. But one thing I will say, they're getting a lot healthier down the stretch here. They're getting reinforcements on both sides of the ball. So even though I kind of was critical of them during like the season, saying like they were winning all those 1-score games, and now you look at them and you go, are they going to do this again? Like, I don't want to spoil. We're going to talk about who our Super Bowl picks are later, but right now it might be PTSD as a Bills fan, but man, I still feel like the Chiefs are the favorite until somebody knocks them off.
That's how I feel too, and like worrying about the Chiefs' pass defense is like worrying about the back windshield wiper on a BMW. You know what I mean? It's like, who cares? Anyways,
All right.
What about the NFC's number 1 seed, a team going not only for its first Super Bowl title, its first ever Super Bowl appearance? Why won't the 15-2 Lions win the Super Bowl?
Very simple. I mean, this just ultimately comes down to pass rush. If you don't have an elite pass rush, you usually don't win Super Bowls unless you have Patrick Mahomes. And this is the worst pass rush in the entire postseason, the lowest sack rate of any team in the postseason. So I've got that's the main concern, and there's really nothing else to say about this team other than that.
Well, what if they get Hutch back in the
They're not.
in the title game?
They're not.
No?
No, they're not.
Were
know.
you heartened at all by the pass rush's performance in Week 18 against the Vikings? Because they had 33 pressures, which was their best since before Hutchinson got hurt.
Darnold likes to hang onto the ball, and they like to run a lot of long developing deep routes. Alex Anzalone made a huge impact in his return.
Yep.
I will say that. I just don't think it's very sustainable. Especially they're going to have to blitz, I think, a lot more if they're going to want to manufacture pressure as opposed to, rushing with 4 and finding pressure with the lack of talent they have.
Fair enough. Boone, I don't know if you chose to talk about the Bills in this segment to emotionally prepare yourself for potential heartbreak, but whatever you got to do, man, tell me why your beloved Bills won't win their first ever Super Bowl this year.
It's called hedging, Jonah, and I've done it before the season.
Sure, it's not a reverse jinx.
Yeah, I said before the season that I was concerned, maybe they wouldn't win the division this year, and they proved me wrong. And as somebody who's staked my career on accuracy, it was the happiest I've ever been to be wrong about something. But going into this one, I'm going to do it again. And part of it is probably because I'm concerned that there are teams like the Chiefs out there that kind of have their number in the postseason. But the thing that I'm worried about with the Bills is, and I talked about it with the Steelers, turnover differential. They had a strong astronomical number this year, plus 24. I mentioned the Steelers were plus 16. They were second. The Bills were plus 24 in turnover margin, number 1 in the league. They were, the first team in 5 years to be over plus 20. And that's a good sign, but you also worry, is regression going to come at the worst time in the playoffs? Is it going to be a problem for them? And that defense, there are still some concerns about it. We saw it just, a month or so ago in that Rams game, right? When the Bills put up 40 points and still lose. We've seen that happen to them in the playoffs before, where Josh Allen does everything he possibly can and the defense lets him down. So it's the defense, but it's also that those turnovers that we know Josh Allen still has the ability to have that. We could see some fumbles, and whether the defense can keep that up and keep getting takeaways. That's the thing I'm worried about, because if they're not doing that, I don't know that the defense is strong enough to really get them all the way there against some of these offenses, like the Chiefs, who are getting healthier, like the Ravens, who we know are great, and some other teams.
I thought you had a rebuttal there.
No,
Nothing?
I think this is Sean McDermott. This just comes down to Sean McDermott.
Right. Okay, back to the NFC for a second. The Rams, they looked dead in the water after starting the season 1-4, but here they are, NFC West Division champs. Last time they did that, they won the Super Bowl. But tell me, Wilkie, why won't these Rams win the Super Bowl?
Look, I really like this team as a dark horse. I love the Stafford to Puka and Cup connection. Sean McVay is great. They've been getting some unbelievable production out of all their young defensive players.
Yeah.
We talked about Jared Verse earlier. I just think the gauntlet in the NFC is going to be way too much for them to overcome when you consider the talent that they have outside of their stars. Their Week 18 decision to sit their starters is going to end up getting them the Vikings in the first round. If they had won, they would have played the Commanders. I think that could easily end up looking like a mistake as soon as this weekend. But even if you get beyond that, their next game is against either the Lions or the Eagles. And then after that, it would probably be the other team. So I think it's just going to be too much for them to overcome, as much as I like them. So I can't see it happening.
All right, the Ravens, AFC North champs for a second straight year. They've been knocking on the door for a while now, and with Lamar Jackson playing the way that he's been playing, they are seemingly as well positioned as anyone else in the NFL to hoist the Lombardi Trophy. So tell me, T, why is that not going to happen for the Ravens?
This has never been the case for Baltimore going into the postseason, but I do think it's about defense, and more specifically their young defensive coordinator Zach Orr. This is his first season at the helm, and they've been good. They've done the same things they did last year in terms of being a pretty surprisingly good pass rush, always being able to stop the run. But they give up a lot of explosive plays in the pass game, and it's on my radar. You said it. George Pickens is back this week. They could be hitting those explosive plays. Maybe the Steelers are a bit more of a threat than we might think. Can a young DC and this defense in the secondary that hasn't quite been good enough match up well with some other great defensive coordinators that they're going to run into in the AFC or a potential Super Bowl? That secondary is my biggest concern with Baltimore, and you can't have too many with this team, to be honest with you.
I think the other concern, too, with the Ravens right now, I think that's a really good point. The other concern, too, is it doesn't look like Zay Flowers is going to play, so they're not going to have him. And could injury strike? Like, if they lose Lamar, dunzo. If they lose their old running back and Derrick Henry, dunzo. Like, they have nobody behind those guys to step up. So I think that's a concern, not having Zay Flowers, and any other sort of injury to that offense, I think, would just potentially put them in a spot to be upset as early as this week.
The Eagles, This is the best Eagles team, I think it's safe to say, of the Jalen Hurts era. Their second half collapse from last year is a distant memory. Saquon's been playing out of his mind, as we talked about earlier, as has their defense. Tell me, Boone, why won't Philly win the Super Bowl this year?
So this is a tough one, right? Like, they have, in my mind, one of the best GMs in the league, maybe the best GM in the league. They got maybe the most talented roster in the league. I think you could easily make that argument. So the thing I kept coming back to is just Nick Sirianni. Like, I can't envision Nick Sirianni hosting a Lombardi trophy. I know he's made it there before, but I think he did it on the basis of having this, like, strong environment around him. I look at him the way I look at, like, Sam Darnold. He's like the Sam Darnold of coaches in my mind, where everything around him is helping, like, lift him up and have this success. Because, and I'm not even mentioning, I mean, like, the immaturity stuff, the problems on the sidelines they have, like, you know, good coordinators, a good roster. They could probably make a run as long as Jalen Hurts is healthy. But, man, I just can't see Sirianni pulling this off. I think he is going to be that Achilles heel for this team. And I think at some point they have to move on from him and go in a different direction. I think that will ultimately maybe put them over the top.
Do not let the city of Philadelphia hear you say they have a better roster than the team that went to the Super Bowl, and then they lose at home to Green Bay this weekend. That would be...
Don't blame
that
me.
Would be that.
It's not on me.
You put it out there. You put it in the universe.
I did
though.
put it out there.
That's probably on the laptop.
Do you
in the
not
script.
agree? Do you not think that this team is better than the one that went to the Super Bowl?
It's got to be. Their pass rush isn't as good. That's a definite absolute.
But their running game is elite now.
Yeah, but it was really good. Miles Sanders had a really, really good year
Yeah.
behind that offensive line that year. Like,
Their
there's
pass rush
certain
is still
things-
good, too.
Yeah, it's solid, but like that was the best pass rush we've seen in like decades.
I think Jalen Hurts was playing better then than
That's
he
a
is
good point,
now,
too.
so
It's
that's
true.
a factor as well. But I think it's really, really close. I agree. I think they're arguably the most talented team in the league, so they've got a shot.
I agree. I love this team, but they're like plus 750. They're behind the Ravens. They're behind the Bills. They're behind the Chiefs. They're behind the Lions. Like, there's all these teams that everybody sees in front of Philadelphia, and I genuinely think they have the best roster of any team right now that's going to the postseason. I'm surprised that more people aren't seeing them as maybe the favorite. I guess the Hurts injury maybe plays a bit of a factor, the concussion, but
I'm picturing Sirianni holding them back in the playoffs and then them like holding him back as he argues with fans after that, like something ridiculous. I think that's how the season's going to end for the Eagles, with just a nightmare scenario, and Sirianni will take the blame.
He's running off the field. The play calling was good. Okay, another pop quiz. Do you know which team has the NFC's longest active division title streak?
it's the Bucs, right?
It is the Bucs. It's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, NFC
does
South
it again.
champs for a fourth straight season. They've got a top 5 offense. They beat the mighty Lions during the regular season. They took the Chiefs to overtime. Might have won that game if Todd Bowles had felt a little more aggressive. Tell me, T, though, why won't this Bucs team win the Super Bowl?
I'm going to start with being very positive. We talked about this last week. This offensive line is great. This offense is really good. They're running the ball efficiently for the first time in a few years now. This is about staying healthy. They have injuries in that secondary with Jamel Dean and Winfield. And they, with Todd Bowles, who gets a lot of flack because this defense hasn't been good enough this year, their scheme and their style, where they like to send a lot of numbers, they like to blitz, they need to be able to trust that secondary to hold up in coverage, and they need the talent on the field to be able to do it. If those guys are available and able to play, this is a team that can make a lot of noise. But if they're not, that secondary can get picked apart against the Eagles, against, if there's a matchup with LA, if there's a matchup with really a lot of these quarterbacks in the NFC. So that's something to look out for throughout the postseason, and especially this week, because the Commanders are no pushover.
Yeah, I was going to say, how about against the Commanders?
Yeah.
I kind of like that game for Washington.
You would, coward. Okay. Last and quite possibly least, we've got the Houston Texans. They didn't take the step forward that a lot of people anticipated that they would following C.J. Stroud's really impressive rookie season, but they did enough to win their division for a second straight year, and I mean, they don't have the lowest point differential among the division winners, so that's something. Boone, enlighten me. Why won't the Texans win the Super Bowl?
I think we could blame a lot of it on the offensive line this year. I think that was a big reason why the offense took a huge step back, and I think that's ultimately going to be their demise. And I don't think we need to spend too much time on this one, because I think it's kind of obvious that they've showed us essentially nothing this year that would make you think they were a legit contender. So hoping for a good offseason and hoping they can come back strong and get back to kind of what they were doing last year after the disappointing 2024.
Yeah, I think maybe we should have made the executive decision to loop them in with the wildcard teams and try to make the case why they could.
This team's not far off. Their defense is really good.
Yep.
The O-line's been terrible. The injuries really suck for that receiving core.
Yeah.
Ooh, is Deontay Johnson going to make an impact maybe this week? Hopefully not.
We'll see.
For me,
This
hopefully not.
doesn't seem like questions you want to be asking about a Super Bowl contender. So
All right, boys. We have teed up every team in the postseason, every team vying for Super Bowl 59. There's only one thing left to do. It's time to make your Super Bowl predictions. Who's winning it and who are they beating? Wilkie?
the Ravens are going to beat the Eagles.
Wow, the Ravens over the Eagles.
I feel like I'm in a position where I have to defend my takes all through this show, so I can do it again if you want. But I think that they're the best team in football. I wrote about it yesterday. That I think that we're all going in. You talked about the betting odds earlier. Everyone thinks the Chiefs and the AFC, maybe the Bills. I think the Ravens are the team to beat this year. They've just been so good on offense. I know you mentioned earlier how defense is giving up explosive plays. That's the case if you look at the season as a whole, but ever since Week 11, when they moved Kyle Hamilton back to safety from his role as a box or slot defender, they've been the best defense in football. So you're talking about a historic offense who is like the first offense ever to have 4,000 passing yards, 3,000 rushing yards, the third best yards per play in NFL history. We talked about how amazing Lamar's been, Derrick Henry. And you take that, add in what may be the best defense in football, and Justin Tucker seems to have figured out his issues. I've got them winning the Super Bowl, and I'm very confident about it. I'm excited to see it.
I love it. It would certainly dispel Tyler's claim from earlier this season that Lamar is a playoff choker.
Yep.
So is it safe to assume you're not picking the Ravens to win the Super Bowl?
I think the Ravens and Chiefs are playing in the AFC Championship game. I'm pretty damn confident about that, but I do think I just can't do this pick against the Chiefs thing. I know we haven't had this show for too long, but I've spent a long time picking against this Chiefs team, and I'm not going to do it. So Chiefs, and I mentioned how good I think the Eagles are, so that'd be my matchup.
Chiefs over Eagles. Boone, who you got?
I'm sticking with what I said before the season, and it was kind of chalky then. It's still kind of chalky, but it's Chiefs over Lions. And I went over the points earlier that even though they kind of made their way through the season and had all those close games, they're getting healthy at the right time, and they're looking as strong as they've looked all year. And until you beat the champs, man, I think they're going to be continuously the team that's going to take it to everybody with the coaching, with all the players they have, and with Patrick Mahomes, the best quarterback in the league, despite the fact that Lamar and Josh Allen are the favorites there for the MVP award. Mahomes is still that guy that just seems like unstoppable when it comes to the postseason.
What do you mean? He wasn't in the Pro Bowl. He didn't make the Pro Bowl.
I think it bodes well for the Bills that no one picked them going to the Super Bowl. I think that bodes well. Let's go with that. I'm not going to elaborate on that, but I don't know, man. I'm with you, by the way. I think that it is Chiefs over Lions. Patrick Mahomes, don't need to say anything else. And don't need to do anything else other than, you guys know what time it is. It's trivia time. Here we go. Saddle up. Travis Kelce has a chance this postseason to move into first place on the all-time leaderboard for playoff receiving yards. Can you name the 9 other players currently among the top 10 in career playoff receiving yards? I'll give it to you one more time. Travis Kelce has a chance this postseason to move into first place on the all-time leaderboard for playoff receiving yards. Can you name the 9 other players currently among the top 10 in career playoff receiving yards? I think I said among weirdly both times that I asked that question. Boone, welcome back. You're up first.
Thank you, and Jerry Rice.
Of course, he's number 1 with over 2,200 career receiving yards in the playoffs.
Damn, that was going to be mine. Obviously, I guess it probably was it'd be all of ours.
If it's a receiving yards question, odds are Jerry Rice is
Don't
the number
say
1
Art
answer.
Monk, say Jerry Rice.
You just have to, I have to think about longevity in the postseason, and I'm going to say a person that I might get laughed out of the room for. Jordy Nelson. Yeah.
Hate to see it. T, we'll see you next time. You are the Denver Broncos of this game. You're out in a flash. 2-horse race. Wilkie, who you got?
Give me Gronk.
That's correct. Gronk is 4th on the all-time playoff receiving yards list with almost 1,400.
That's who I was going to say. This is where I'm torn between, like, do I want to win and extend the show, or do I want to just end the show and go home early? I'll say
you want to end the show and go home early.
Michael Irving.
Correct. He's 5th on the list with 1,315 career playoff receiving yards. Wilkie?
Marvin Harrison. No? Wow.
Marvin Harrison is not on the list, shockingly, because he
Okay.
and Peyton Manning went to the playoffs so many times. But that means, Boone,
Hey.
you are the champion.
I'm curious. I want to throw out a bill. Is Andre Reed on that list?
Andre Reed is indeed
That
on the
was gonna be
list.
my next
so
one.
you are very much the champion. Andre Reed is 8th on the list with 1,229 career receiving yards in the playoffs. Booney, we're going to mark you down. Last week, in your stead, Zachy did a heck of a job filling in. He got you your first championship, but this one is absolutely unabridged. That one belongs to you, even though it's directly below the asterisk. Doesn't matter. Congratulations, Boone. You are the champion. And here are the ones you guys missed. Whoop, my earpiece is falling out. Here are the ones you guys missed. Julian Edelman, 3rd on the list. I'm surprised nobody guessed Julian Edelman, given that him and Tom Brady went to the playoffs
I just
187
thought Marvin
times.
Harrison was such a lock.
Yeah, I know. It's the other guy. Yeah.
Reggie Wayne, yeah. I thought it could be
Cliff
both.
Branch,
Oh, okay.
Raiders legend, Cliff Branch, Hall of Famer. He's 6th on the list. Reggie Wayne, obviously. He's 7th on the list. Reggie Wayne with 1,254 career playoff receiving yards. Tyreek Hill, he's 9th with more than 1,200 career receiving yards in the playoffs. And then number 10, Steel Town legend, Hines Ward.
Yeah.
Hines Ward, 10th on the list. And by the way, I looked this up just for you. Art Monk is 14th, so he's just off the top 10.
Classic Art Monk. He's like so close in all of these, but never quite
So
in there.
close yet so far. Always a bridesmaid, that Art Monk. All right, that'll do it for today's episode of No Timeouts. Once again, if you dig the show, check it out on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you're tired of looking at our faces and just want it in audio only, you can do that. That's Justin Boone. That's Tyler MacKillop. That's Dan Wilkins. My name is Jonah Birenbaum. We'll see you next time.